We are told that before the modern era, cities were built with limited technology. Stone was cut by hand, lumber was hauled by animal, and brick was fired in kilns small enough for a single craftsman to manage alone. This is the standard framework. It accounts for most of what we find. But there is one specific structure, repeated across nearly every major urban center recorded before the 19th century, that this framework does not comfortably explain. It is a tower. Not a church steeple, not a military fortification. A freestanding, centrally located tower of considerable height, built to precise proportions, equipped in many cases with metallic components at its apex, and documented in city records not as a new construction, but as something inherited, already standing when the records began. The official explanation for these towers varies by region. In Central Europe, they are classified as firewatch towers. In parts of the Middle East and Central Asia, they are called minarets or signal towers. In North America, where they appear in early settlement maps of cities later redesigned, they are typically labeled as belfries or civic monuments. The classification differs. The structure does not. What repeats across geographic and cultural boundaries is a tower of roughly similar proportion. Narrow base relative to height, exterior metalwork or conductive elements near the top, and an interior that, in many surviving examples, shows no consistent evidence of the function assigned to it. This raises a technical problem. A firewatch tower requires a clear sightline and a platform wide enough for a person to stand and rotate. Many of the towers categorized this way have no such platform, or have platforms added in later centuries during restoration. A signal tower requires a method of signaling, fire, flag, or mirror, and a documented system of relay points. In most cases, that system is absent from the historical record. What exists is the tower itself, and a classification assigned after the fact. Consider the tower structures documented in old city maps of Philadelphia, Cincinnati, and Detroit, all produced before the urban expansions of the 1870s and 1880s. In each case, a central tower appears in illustrations of the city at a scale that suggests a height of 60 to 90 feet. In each case, the tower does not appear in later maps. No demolition record explains its removal. The standard interpretation is that these illustrations were decorative or inaccurate. That is possible. But the same visual pattern, a prominent central tower absent from later records, appears in early representations of St. Louis, New Orleans, and dozens of smaller settlements across the Mississippi watershed. At some point, a pattern of absence requires more explanation than artistic license. The question is not whether these towers existed. At least several hundred survive in various states of preservation across Europe and the former Ottoman territories. The question is what they were for, and why the explanations assigned to them consistently fail to account for their most unusual physical features. The most persistent of those features is the metallic apex. In surviving examples across northern Italy, the Balkans, and Turkey, towers of civic or administrative designation are found to have had copper or iron fixtures at their highest point. In many cases, these fixtures extend above the main structure as a rod or finial. The official interpretation is decorative, a symbol of authority, a lightning rod added in later centuries, or an anchor point for flags. The lightning rod explanation is worth examining. Benjamin Franklin introduced the lightning rod to widespread practical use in the 1750s. Towers with metal apex structures appear in paintings, city seals, and administrative records dating to the 15th and 16th centuries, 300 years earlier. Either the dating of those fixtures is wrong, or the lightning rod explanation is anachronistic. This is not an argument that these towers generated or transmitted electricity in a modern sense. It is an observation that the physical configuration of many surviving towers, tall, isolated, centrally located, with elevated metallic components, and in some cases, underground foundations that extend deeper than structural necessity requires, matches the profile of a system designed to interact with electrical or atmospheric phenomena. Whether that was intentional, and whether the builders understood what they were doing in the terms we would use today, are separate questions. What can be observed is the configuration. What remains unexplained is why that configuration repeats. There is a further anomaly in how these towers are distributed within cities. In a city organized around trade, towers cluster near markets. In a city organized around religion, towers cluster near temples. In a city organized around defense, towers cluster on walls. The towers in question do not follow these patterns consistently. They appear at city centers, on elevated ground within the urban boundary, and sometimes at regular intervals, suggesting a network rather than a single structure. In several old European cities, Bruges, Cologne, and certain sections of Prague, the spacing of historical tower locations, when plotted on a map, produces a geometric regularity that is inconsistent with ad hoc civic construction. Regular spacing implies planned distribution. Planned distribution implies a function that required multiple nodes working in relation to one another. What that function was is not recorded. The issue of missing records is itself unusual. Medieval and early modern Europe was an intensely bureaucratic culture. Construction projects were documented. Land ownership was recorded. Tax assessments noted buildings by function. For towers of the kind described here, this level of documentation is frequently absent. They appear in maps. They appear in paintings. They appear in the background of official portraits. But their construction, who commissioned them, who built them, at what cost, for what stated purpose, is often simply not recorded, not lost, not destroyed, simply never generated as far as the surviving archive shows. Modern attempts to replicate the stonework found in towers of this type have confirmed what is visible to the naked eye, that the lower courses of many surviving examples use a construction technique that is poorly understood. The precision of the jointing, the treatment of the stone face, and in some cases the apparent homogeneity of the material suggest either a degree of skill inconsistent with known workshop traditions of the period, or a material technology that would require industrial processes not documented in the historical record. Neither explanation is accepted in the mainstream. The result is that the question of how the lower courses were made remains technically open while being institutionally closed. It is also worth noting how these towers are treated when they fall into disrepair or become obstacles to urban development. The standard pattern for a building of genuine historical significance is preservation or documentation. For towers of this type, the historical record shows a different pattern: rapid demolition, often in the second half of the 19th century, sometimes within years of a new municipal government taking control of a city. In American examples, the towers disappear from maps during post-Civil War urban expansion. In European cities, the same compression occurs during industrial urbanization. The timing is consistent enough to suggest that these structures were specifically in the way of something, not physically, but administratively or conceptually. Ancient tower documentary script: the structures still exist. What they were part of does not.